Welcome to Solo Journeys podcast, where every journey begins with a single step. I'm your host Sasha, and today I'm talking to a family therapist, Bruce Chalmer. For today, we have two important questions to answer. What does it take to keep a relationship truly healthy? And what does intimacy really mean, beyond romance or physical closeness? Hello, Bruce. So, in the last episode, we discussed red flags in the relationship, and you mentioned the word intimacy. I would like to explore this topic a little bit more in depth. Definition, what do you think is intimacy?
So when I use the word intimacy, what I mean, not just sex, I mean in a much broader sense. When two people are both present and honest with themselves and each other. That's how I define intimacy. I'm not always present with myself. I might be distracted by things or whatever, but when I'm present with myself, it means I can feel what I feel. I don't know, I might have mixed feelings, but I feel like I can say what I want to say. And I can hear my partner doing the same thing. That's what I mean by intimacy. So you can be physically intimate with someone by being present in your body and they're present in their body and you're together. You can be emotionally intimate in the sense that you know how you feel and you're willing to express it and you're willing to hear what the other person's saying. You can be spiritually intimate. I'm not quite sure how to define that, except it's that feeling of being alive and being valid in the moment. One of the things that I often refer to is that intimacy is every bit as much of a need for a couple as stability is. Stability is important too. Stability is what keeps the anxiety level relatively low. The chief skill of stability is about keeping the anxiety low. The chief skill of intimacy is tolerating anxiety without freaking out totally, tolerating anxiety without panic.
Can you give an example of intimacy and the stability working together in a life scenario, please?
The things that foster stability are a bunch of things that I like to refer to as the boring traits. They're really important, but they're boring. When somebody is reliable, when somebody is accountable, in other words, that you can say, "Hey, I want to call your attention to something I wish you would change." If somebody's willing to hear that, that's accountability. If somebody is usually sober, so that you can actually count on them to be able to be functioning well with you. All of those things are traits that are good for stability. Stability is really important because without it, people tend to freak out. They can't count on each other. Reliability is a really important part of it. For intimacy, what you need is the ability to tolerate if somebody's saying something that's a little bit scary. Even if they're saying they're complaining about something, they're saying, "Hey, I wish you would change something you're doing." Those can be moments of intimacy. When a couple has both stability and intimacy, they feel free to say what's on their mind. They feel free to act in ways that they want to act, of course, with consideration of the other person, but they don't feel constricted in the sense that, "Oh no, I can't bring up that topic with you because you might freak out if I do." To say it in the positive terms, when a couple feels that sense of easily flowing intimacy, they can say what's on their minds. They can think things they wouldn't have thought by themselves. That's another feature of intimacy. When you have people together in an intimate setting, they've created a joint mind. It's not just one mind anymore. A couple that's having an intimate conversation, they're thinking things that neither one of them would have thought by themselves. And in fact, in couples therapy, that's what I strive to have in a three-way conversation. Me and the couple, we're trying to have an intimate conversation in the sense that none of us are thinking the same thoughts we would have thought by ourselves. We're creating, a joint mind that comes up with things that no one of us would have come up with.
Are people more willing to open up when they are working with you, or it's more the way that you give some tools or you guide them and then they figure it out in their life?
Well, of course, what we all want is that they be able to figure it out in their own lives themselves. They'd be able to do it themselves. But if I'm working well, if I feel like I'm working well in a session, that is exactly what happens. They feel more able to have an intimate conversation. They feel more able to say what's on their minds, even if it's a little bit scary to say. The way I try to foster that, I mean, I can't guarantee it, but the atmosphere I try to create is one where I am clear that both parties are valid. They're not crazy. They're not evil. They're not stupid. They're valid to be who they are, even if they have things they're not sure about. And so they can feel safe enough to say what's on their minds without feeling like they'll be shamed or There are techniques, there are ways of working that are very technique heavy. They're all about, do these things and that will help you. Let me teach you how to have a conversation using I statements. Let me teach you how to have a conversation using active listening. Let me teach you the rules of nonviolent communication. Lots of good ideas in there. When the focus becomes the technique, it turns ridiculous. It
Mm.
turns into a caricature. But they made a series, a limited series, a modern one, based on the idea of that, the Four Seasons. It's based on the idea of these couples that get together 4 times a year to do vacations and stuff like that, and what happens to that couple. And it was, it's very well done, funny in a lot of ways. At one point, they had this one couple. They had obviously been to couples therapy, and so one of them said to the other, I need a moment. And they clicked into this technique where they held their hands out and, held hands in a particular way. And one of them said, very formulaic, like, when you do this, then that's what happens for me. And I hear what you're saying, and they would repeat it back,
It sounds a little bit superficial, actually.
Well, it was ridiculously superficial in the way they did it. They said the things that they were taught to say, but they didn't really hear each other. The problem is if you take a couple that is not doing well with each other, a couple that is angry with each other, that is doubtful of each other's loyalty, and try to teach them to talk like that, it'll turn out a caricature. That's not what you need. The vast majority of people I work with are already very, very good at communicating. The problem is what they're communicating. They're very good at communicating how angry they are or how confused they are or whatever it is. They're very good at communicating that. That's the problem is that they're feeling that way. That's what you need to focus on. It's like, wow, you're really angry. What's going on? What is scaring you? What is underneath that? What's happening that is, what are your doubts? What's going on here? When you can actually hear that stuff, it's, they can get to what I like to call the oh shit moment. I may have mentioned that in our other conversation. I don't remember. The oh shit moment, when a person is realizing, oh, that's what's happening here. You're not crazy. You're not evil. You're thinking something really different than I thought you were thinking. Oh,
Okay.
and I can even see why. I still disagree with you, but I can see why. That's the oh shit moment. It's not a aha. The aha moment, that's when you've solved the problem. You haven't solved the problem yet. But the oh shit moment, you're on your way to solving it because it's like, oh shit, that's what's happening. If both parties can get to an oh shit moment, they're not fighting at that point. They're facing something that may be very difficult. In fact, it's scary sometimes because sometimes when an oh shit moment leads to is realizing you've got a deal breaker. It's like, oh no, we're both valid, but we can't seem to be together here. The classic one on that is, you have a heterosexual couple, except one of them realizes they're gay. It's just not going to work. I mean, I actually have known couples where they still stay together, they find a way to stay together, but it's not going to work the way they thought it would, put it that way. So that phenomenon that's a classic oh shit moment, or even things like, oh wow, we're both fine, but we realize we need to be living in completely separate places and we don't want to have a long distance relationship. That can be the result of an oh shit moment. You can end up with a deal breaker. But in a positive sense, you can also end up with a couple realizing, oh, wait a minute, you're not out to get me, are you? It's like you can feel like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we can find each other here.
So for a couple that experiences issues, they don't feel connection between them. Most probably, intimacy is missing. This is the moment when you understand that something doesn't work. We are living in two different worlds. It's a time to meet a therapist, a couple therapist.
It is often a very good time to meet a therapist, yes, when they realize that. That happens to be the book I'm working on now. That's my next book. The subtitle of the book is, I don't think I have it finalized yet, but it's something like When You Feel Miles Apart But Still Love Each Other. And lots of couples I work with, that's exactly it. They just don't feel connected anymore. The intimacy part is gone. They still love each other in the sense of they have a shared history. They might have children together, they have a life together, but they just can't find the intimacy.
Mhm.
And indeed, that's often a good time to do therapy. I say often, there are some times where it's not, where therapy is not a good idea. If the level of anger is so great, if there's actual violence and it's not safe, don't do couples therapy, split up, or at least get separate. If somebody is just using it to get, to use against the other person, that's not going to work. But if a couple really wants to explore the possibility, can they find each other again? Yes, therapy can be very, helpful.
So basically, I would like to to get a sneak peek. Maybe you have some
Oh, yeah.
recommendations that you are ready to share beforehand.
Oh, I'm happy to. Yes, I'll give all kinds of spoilers. Yeah, the way I've structured the book actually is around those ideas of stability and intimacy. So the first thing you do in the book after just the introduction is you do I've written a questionnaire that helps people focus on the stability and intimacy in their relationship. It just gives them a way of understanding like what's going on. They take stock, and then they also take stock of all sorts of details, various details where they might be having problems or they might be strong. How you doing with parenting? How you doing with finances? How you doing with, has there been some sort of betrayal like infidelity or something like that? How are you doing with dealing with extended families and in-laws and things like that? Do you have problems between the two of you based on politics or religion or, all sorts of different areas where people run into issues? And so after that, people have taken stock, then I have them evaluate, well, do you want to stay together or not? That's a painful chapter, but I think it's an important one. Should you call it quits or not? What I urge people in that is don't break up too soon. In other words, if you're not absolutely sure it's a deal breaker, don't break the deal yet. You might end up doing so, but don't do it yet
Give it a
because
chance.
give it a chance because mostly because you need to learn from it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if people are saying, I just want out of this, if it isn't logically a deal breaker. If it isn't something like I mentioned the ones before about, okay, somebody figured out they're gay and the couple wants to have a sexual relationship. It's not going to work if they're heterosexual. If it's a man and a woman and one of them's gay, it's not going to work. It's not going to work if they want to have a sexual relationship. If they want to be monogamous, it's not going to work. I know couples who've done that, who've tried anyway. They've said, no, we'll sacrifice that part or whatever. But most couples would find that's a deal breaker, whatever. Because logically, that isn't going to change. Logically, another classic deal breaker, do you want to have children or not? If one person says, absolutely yes, I really want to have biological children, and the other person says, absolutely no, I really will not have biological children, there's no compromise available. You can't sort of have biological children. You can either have them or not. And so that tends to be a deal breaker. If it's growing pains, in theory, you could grow your way out of this. You could find each other again and explore that possibility. So that's what I do in the last part of the book. It's all about looking at every one of those little topic areas, including things like, finances and parenting and, do you want to have children? Do you want to get married? Also, all things like that. And the one I happen to be working on right now is the chapter on sex, which is all about, okay, if you're having sexual issues, what might you do about that? And it invites people to then make some sort of action plan to realize, well, okay, they have to make some decisions. One of the choices is don't do anything and see what happens. Don't try and change anything. That's a legitimate choice. But also they might say, well, we need to have conversations. Maybe we need to do therapy. Maybe I need to tell my partner something that's really been bothering me that I've never told them before.
Mm-hmm.
That whole idea of stability and intimacy, we want both, but sometimes they conflict. It really is about, yeah, creating that safe space with each other.
Thank you very much. This was very insightful talk. I hope to see you soon again. Today, Bruce reminded us that intimacy isn't just about romance, it's about honesty, presence, and the courage to tolerate discomfort without running away. When stability and intimacy work together, relationship grows stronger, but when they are out of balance, it's easy to drift apart. Take a moment to notice where intimacy shows up in your life and where it might need a little attention. If this episode resonated with you, share your thoughts with me on social media at Solo Journeys Podcast and let's keep the conversation going.